The day before my sister's wedding, I woke up to a horrifying reality. My hair was gone, cut while I slept, an act of justice my mother deemed necessary so I wouldn't outshine the bride. They thought they had diminished me, broken my spirit, but they had no idea what was about to happen. Hi Reddit. I'm 34F, and honestly, I still don't know how to begin unpacking what just happened. I keep staring at the mirror, touching the uneven strands of what used to be my hair, and wondering how on earth I ended up here, standing in the ruins of what used to be family. I guess if I want to make sense of this for you, I should start with the characters in this disaster. There's me, Ilara. I live about 4 hours away from my hometown and have, for the most part, built a quiet, peaceful life. I work as an art teacher at a local community center, live with my dog in a small, sunlit apartment, and I'm someone who genuinely enjoys solitude and simplicity. I've never been one for the spotlight, which makes what happened all the more bizarre. Then there's my mother, Denise. My relationship with her has always been complicated. Growing up, it felt like I was constantly auditioning for her approval. It didn't matter if I got good grades, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, or even helped Corinne with her school projects. Denise would only ever seem proud if it somehow benefited my younger sister. Ah yes, Corinne. She's 29, the baby of the family, and my mother's obvious favorite. I know that sounds dramatic, but if you've ever sat through a family dinner where your own mother refers to your sibling as our little miracle while calling you so practical, you'll understand what I mean. Corinne was born after a miscarriage and a few years of trying, and ever since then, she's been treated like a rare gem, precious, delicate, and untouchable. Now, Corinne is the type who can make anything about herself. She has a knack for playing both the victim and the star of the show simultaneously. If you bring up something difficult happening in your life, she'll somehow relate it back to a time she suffered worse. And yet, she also needs constant praise, affirmation, and admiration. A few years ago, I started noticing how her social media posts weren't just about updates. They were carefully curated exhibitions. Posing with volunteer groups she only visited once. Talking about wedding planning stress for months before she was even engaged. You get the picture. The wedding had been in the works for over a year. Tyler, her fiancé, is a soft-spoken guy who smiles too much and, from what I can tell, doesn't push back on anything she says. I wouldn't say he's a bad person, just the type who would rather avoid tension than stand up for what's right. Which makes him perfect for Corinne. I was invited to be a bridesmaid, though I suspect it was more out of obligation than genuine desire. The message came from Mom. Corinne wants you in the wedding. You'll wear blush, nothing flashy, hair up. We'll book a stylist. That last part stuck with me. We'll book a stylist. As if I couldn't be trusted to show up looking appropriate. Still, I said yes. I thought, be gracious. Show up, smile, and go home. I didn't want to stir the pot. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument. I arrived at the family home 3 days before the wedding, suitcase in hand, dress still in its plastic cover. My room was the same one I used to sleep in as a teenager, only now it felt smaller, like the walls were holding in years of tension. The house was bustling, Mom darting from one task to the next, Corinne on speakerphone with the caterer, classical music playing somewhere in the background. I gave Corinne a polite hug when I saw her, only to be met with a once-over glance and a flat, "Your hair's really long now." It wasn't a compliment. "It suits you," I said calmly, brushing past it. She didn't reply. Over the next 2 days, things were mostly surface level. Lots of small talk. Lots of passive-aggressive suggestions from Mom. I noticed they were quick to point out anything they felt didn't match the theme. My nail color was too loud. My shoes weren't the shade of blush we agreed on. Even the way I curled my hair for the bridal brunch earned a pointed look from Corinne, followed by a muttered, "Some people just can't help making everything about themselves." I wanted to believe I was imagining the hostility, that I was being sensitive. But when Corinne announced that she had decided to change the seating chart last minute, moving me to a far corner so you'll have more quiet, I knew it wasn't in my head. Still, I kept calm. I didn't bite back. I figured, one more day and I'd be done with all of it. Then came the morning before the wedding. I woke up around 7:30 a.m., a little groggy, but otherwise fine. The light was filtering through the curtains. I remember thinking I might go for a walk before the rehearsal dinner chaos began. I ran my fingers through my hair, and I froze. My fingertips brushed against something jagged, uneven. Confused, I sat up and looked at the pillow, scattered with long, dark strands. I rushed to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and stood there in silence. The right side of my hair had been cut, not trimmed, not styled, hacked. One section was cut close to the scalp, while others were blunt and uneven. It looked like someone had taken safety scissors and attacked me in my sleep. My scalp prickled. I couldn't breathe. I staggered back, heart racing. I checked the room. Nothing seemed disturbed. The window was locked. The door had been shut when I woke up, which meant someone had come into my room while I slept. I threw on a sweater and rushed downstairs, still in shock. I must have looked half-crazed because Mom raised her eyebrows before I even spoke. "Alara," she said evenly, setting down a tray of fruit. "I wondered when you'd come down." I stared at her. "Someone cut my hair." She didn't flinch. "Yes, that was me." I blinked. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "I did it," she continued, with a sigh. "I didn't want to, but I had to. You were going to draw attention away from Corinne tomorrow. We couldn't allow that." I looked at her. Truly looked. There was no remorse in her expression. No shame. Just cold practicality. "You cut my hair in the middle of the night while I was asleep," I whispered. "That's not something you had to do. That's insane." At that moment, Corinne walked in, robes cinched tight, sipping something from a pale pink mug. She saw me and smiled, like she was relieved. "I told her you wouldn't understand," she said, brushing past me. "You always make everything about you, Alara. This is my wedding." I couldn't even form words. Mom chimed in again. "You should be thanking us. You'll still look fine, and now Corinne doesn't have to worry about being overshadowed by her sister trying to look like a celebrity on her special day." They spoke like it was reasonable, like they had adjusted a crooked centerpiece. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Standing there in the kitchen, staring at my mother and Corinne as they sipped their tea like everything was normal, I felt something in me start to calcify. I wasn't just angry, I was done. All the years of biting my tongue, of going along to keep the peace, of convincing myself that if I was just calmer, more understanding, less dramatic, I could coexist with them, it evaporated. Whatever thread had tied me to their world, it snapped right then and there. "I'm going back to my room," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake, and that surprised even me. Corinne rolled her eyes. "You're not going to make a scene, are you? It's one bad haircut. You'll still be in the pictures, just maybe from the left side." Mom added, "I left a clip on your dresser. You can twist it up and make it work. It's not that bad, Alara, if you'd stop being so dramatic for once." I didn't answer. I turned and walked upstairs, slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of their words pressing against the back of my skull. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it and exhaled for the first time since waking up. My reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable. I'd always worn my hair long, usually in loose waves. It wasn't about vanity. It was one of the few things that made me feel quietly confident, like armor. It framed my face, softened the sharpness in my features. Now, the right side was choppy and raw, like something had been stolen from me in the night. But here's the thing. When someone thinks they've humiliated you, when they expect you to crumble and retreat, and you don't, that's the moment you take back the power. I sat down, pulled out my phone, and took a picture. Not for vanity, for documentation. Then I opened my laptop. Now, before you think this turns into a legal battle or something grand, let me say, I wasn't thinking that far ahead yet. My first instinct wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I needed to stop doubting myself. For so many years, I dismissed their behavior as difficult or tense family dynamics. But standing in that room with hacked-off hair was my wake-up call. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated act, and they didn't even try to hide it. At noon, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Alara? Are you almost ready?" It was my aunt, Noelle, my mom's sister, and one of the only family members I could tolerate. She'd flown in from Vermont and was staying in a nearby hotel. I opened the door partway. She blinked. "Oh my, what happened?" I told her everything. Slowly, carefully. She listened, her hand pressed to her chest, her face twisting between disbelief and fury. "They what?" she whispered. "Denise cut your hair while you were asleep?" And Corinne knew. I nodded. She looked like she didn't know whether to scream or cry. "Alara, this is deranged. Are you okay? What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not pretending everything's fine." "Good," she said fiercely, "because it isn't. And you shouldn't." By the time the rehearsal dinner rolled around, I had pulled myself together as best I could. I styled what was left of my hair into a low twist, concealing the damage with some effort. I wasn't going to hide, and I certainly wasn't going to cry in a corner. I wore a navy blue wrap dress, not the blush bridesmaid gown. That was intentional. As I stepped out of the car at the country club, my mom spotted me across the parking lot. Her face went stiff. "Alara," she called, walking quickly toward me. Where's your dress? I decided not to wear it, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. We agreed on a theme. No, I replied. You decided on a theme. I was never asked what I wanted. This is not the time to be difficult, she snapped. It's not the time to cut people's hair in their sleep either, I said, my voice low and steady. She looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're not the victim here. I smiled. You just said I wasn't the victim, after you admitted to attacking me in my sleep. That's an interesting thing to say. Before she could respond, Corinne appeared. She looked flawless, of course. Hair in a polished updo, dress tailored to perfection. But there was something in her eyes, something wary. Like she'd expected me to disappear quietly and was now unsure what I was planning. I see you're still coming, even though you look like a backup dancer from a school play, she said, trying for a laugh. I turned to her slowly. You know what's funny? I used to feel bad for you. I thought maybe all this need for attention came from a place of insecurity. But now, I think you're just cruel. Her smile faltered. I walked past them and into the venue. The dinner itself was a strained affair. There were speeches, laughter, toasts. But there was tension, too. People noticed I wasn't sitting at the bridal party table. No one said anything directly, but I caught glances. One of Tyler's cousins leaned over and whispered, You okay? You seem off. I just smiled and said, Everything's just starting to make sense. It was Noelle who finally broke the illusion. She stood up toward the end of the meal, clinking her glass politely. I'm not one for long speeches, she began. But I just want to say how proud I am of my niece Alara. I've watched her grow into a gracious, thoughtful woman who handles things with more patience than most people ever could. She paused. And I hope, truly, that the rest of the family sees that patience for what it is, not weakness, but strength. Because when people cross lines and act out of cruelty, it's easy to stay silent. Much harder to stay composed. Alara, you are more poised than I could ever be. You could hear a fork drop. Mom's eyes flashed. Corinne's jaw tightened. Noelle sat down without another word. It was subtle, but effective. People began murmuring. Glancing my way, someone finally asked what she meant, and I simply smiled and said, You'll know soon enough. I stayed for the rest of the dinner. I smiled. I thanked the staff. I even posed for a few group photos. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange calm. I woke up earlier than usual, not out of anxiety, but clarity. I took a long shower, letting the water run over the jagged, uneven cut that still crowned the right side of my head. By now, I'd given up trying to fix it. I wore it like a badge. It wasn't just bad hair, it was evidence. A mark of what they had done in their attempt to humiliate me, to shrink me down until I no longer threatened their fragile narrative. But they'd miscalculated. They thought cutting my hair would make me invisible. They didn't realize it had made me unforgettable. I sat at the small desk by the window in the guest room, sipping tea and reviewing my notes one last time. My phone buzzed with texts from my Aunt Noelle and two cousins who had overheard parts of last night's awkward aftermath. The word had started to trickle out. Whispers at the rehearsal dinner had traveled fast. Something had happened, something serious, and people were starting to ask questions. But I didn't respond to the messages right away. I had my own plan, and it required precision. By 10 a.m., the house was a flurry of activity. Hairdressers, makeup artists, florists, all rotating through like a parade of politeness and practiced smiles. The bridal suite was down the hall, and I could hear Corinne's laughter now and then, interspersed with the sharp commands she always disguised as gentle requests. Mom's voice was the louder one, managing everyone's time like a clipboard-wielding general. I dressed deliberately, not in the blush gown. That had been ruined in more ways than one. Instead, I wore a soft gray midi dress, elegant, simple, and just formal enough to toe the line. I did my makeup carefully, choosing soft tones that brought out my eyes, and left my hair as it was, twisted into a half-up braid that exposed every jagged edge. No one could look at me and think this was a fashion choice. It was a statement. At exactly 11:30, I left the house and headed to the venue, a beautiful historic estate about 20 minutes away. I arrived before most of the guests and was greeted by one of the planners. Alara, they told me you weren't coming with the bridal party. I'm arriving on my own, I said with a pleasant smile. It's simpler that way. She didn't question it, just showed me to the side garden where the family was scheduled to take photos before the ceremony. That's when I saw Tyler. He was standing under the arbor, adjusting his cufflinks, looking every bit the groom. When he turned and saw me, his smile froze for half a second. I watched his eyes dart up to my hair. Then his face softened, and he walked toward me slowly. "Alara," he said, voice low. I heard something happened, but I didn't know it was. He hesitated, searching for words. "Extreme?" I offered, smiling thinly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something earlier. Corinne told me you had a meltdown over your dress and stormed off. I didn't believe it, but you didn't ask," I said, still calm. "You let them tell the story." He looked at the ground. "I guess I did." "Well," I said, reaching into my bag, "I'll be telling my side soon enough." Before he could ask what I meant, I handed him a folded piece of paper, a printed version of the timeline. My version. It listed the night I arrived, the text from Mom, the conversation at the bridal brunch, the haircut, their admissions, even Corinne's mocking remark afterward. All documented. All clear. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because you're marrying into this family, and you deserve to know what you're stepping into." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, I turned and walked inside. It was time. The guests were starting to arrive now, their voices echoing lightly in the marbled entryway. The ceremony was to begin in less than an hour, and the energy was shifting into the polished, smiling chaos weddings always become in the final stretch. I found Noelle in the lobby, speaking quietly to my cousin Leora. Both of them turned when they saw me. "Alara," Noelle said gently. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "Did you go through with it?" she asked. I gave him the truth, I replied. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes before the ceremony, the wedding coordinator approached the bridal suite and knocked once before walking in. I stood in the hallway, quiet and unseen, as voices erupted inside. "No, she can't just..." What did she tell him? It was Corinne, unmistakably. A few seconds later, the door flung open, and she stepped out, still in her dressing robe, face flushed and furious. She saw me, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. "You had no right," she hissed. "I had every right," I replied, keeping my voice measured. "You and Mom violated my body in the name of not stealing your spotlight. You humiliated me, lied about it, and then expected me to sit quietly while you played the perfect bride. You're trying to ruin my wedding," she snapped. "No," I said. "You did that the moment you decided a haircut was more important than a relationship." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Tyler is still going to marry me," she said. "All your little sob story did was make you look desperate." "We'll see," I said. "You always assumed people would side with you. But once people start to see past the curtain," she scoffed, then turned on her heel and slammed the suite door behind her. I waited, and it happened sooner than I thought. 10 minutes before the ceremony, Tyler's best man stepped up to the podium with a microphone in hand. At first, everyone thought he was giving the usual reminder to silence phones and find seats. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a slight change in the schedule. Please remain seated while we communicate with the wedding party." Murmurs filled the air. Chairs creaked. Guests glanced around. Then the doors to the bridal suite opened again. But it wasn't Corinne who emerged. It was my mother. She looked rattled, like she'd been slapped by the wind. Her carefully curled hair was already starting to lose shape, and her face had gone pale. She spotted me instantly. "Alara," she said sharply. "What did you do?" I turned slowly. "I told the truth," I said. "You've humiliated Corinne. She's in tears. She's locked herself in the dressing room. She cut my hair in my sleep," I said louder now. "You cut my hair while I was unconscious, because you thought I'd look better than your favorite daughter." Several guests had turned to look. Some gasped. One older aunt covered her mouth. Mom took a step toward me. "You are trying to destroy this family." "No," I said. "You did that. I'm just letting people see it." She opened her mouth again, but this time, I didn't let her speak. I turned to the room, to the guests, to the friends and relatives who had known me since I was a child. And I told them everything. What they did, how they planned it, what they said afterward. And then I said, calmly, "I won't stay and pretend this is normal. I won't play along." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out. As I stepped out of the venue, the warm afternoon sun hit my face, and I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in days. There was something surreal about walking away from the building, past the perfectly trimmed hedges and parked cars lined up along the driveway, as if I were stepping out of a play I'd never agreed to be in. Behind me, the voices rose. Shuffling. Uncertainty. I didn't need to look back to know that the chaos I'd left inside was unfolding exactly the way it needed to. I got into my car, hands still slightly trembling, and sat there for a while. No music, no distractions, just the slow return of peace in my chest, the stillness after the storm. Then I drove to the hotel where Noelle was staying. She met me in the lobby with a look that said everything: relief, pride, and something else that felt like solidarity. "You did it," she said, giving me a firm hug. "They'll never be able to rewrite this one." "I didn't do it for revenge," I said, though even I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. "I just wanted it to stop. The pretending, the silence. It needed to happen," she said. "Some truths have to be heard out loud." We had a quiet dinner together that night. I didn't feel like celebrating, but I didn't want to be alone either. And in that little restaurant, away from the tension and fake smiles of the venue, I felt more seen than I had in years. By the next morning, the news had spread through the family like wildfire. The wedding had not happened. Tyler had called it off, privately, quietly, just before the ceremony was meant to begin. I wasn't there to see it, but Noelle spoke to one of the groomsmen, who described it as gentle but final. Tyler had apparently spoken to Corinne behind closed doors for about 15 minutes. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just a calm, heavy ending. He then stood before the guests, those who had remained despite the tension, and simply said that the wedding would not continue, that there were personal matters that needed attention, that they appreciated everyone's time and presence, but they would not be moving forward. Corinne, I was told, didn't leave her dressing room for hours. Denise? She spent the next day calling everyone she could to clarify what had happened. Her version shifted depending on who she spoke to. First it was a misunderstanding, then a breakdown, and eventually, when those didn't stick, she reverted to blaming me entirely. Apparently, she tried to tell people I sabotaged the event out of jealousy, that I had always been bitter about Corinne's engagement. But it was too late. Enough people had heard what really happened, either from me, Noelle, or the handful of guests who had witnessed our exchange in the hallway. And it turns out people aren't as gullible as my mother thought. 3 days after the canceled wedding, I returned home. I didn't take calls. I didn't respond to messages from my mother, which ranged from icy silence to guilt-laced paragraphs about what I'd done to the family. Corinne never reached out. Not a word. Not even to deny what she did. And I was fine with that. I didn't need closure from them. In the following weeks, I cut off contact entirely. I blocked both of them, Denise and Corinne, on every platform. I didn't announce it. I didn't make it dramatic. I simply stopped allowing them space in my life. I reconnected with a few cousins who reached out after the wedding, people who admitted they'd seen signs over the years but never said anything. Some apologized. Others just offered quiet support. And that was enough. I also decided to document everything formally. No lawsuits or police reports. I didn't want to drag this into a court. But I did speak with a lawyer about my options, just in case. And I wrote everything down. Not for revenge, but for the record. If they ever tried to spin it again, I wanted to have the truth in black and white. As for Tyler, he emailed me about 2 weeks later. A short, respectful note. "Alara, I'm so sorry for what you went through. I didn't see things clearly until that day, and that's on me. Thank you for opening my eyes. I hope you're doing well. Tyler." I never replied. I didn't need anything from him, either. But I appreciated the message. Over time, I began to feel like myself again. I got a proper haircut, one that evened out the damage. I returned to my art classes, and my students, sweet kids with big hearts, immediately noticed. "You look fierce," one of them said with a grin. And maybe I did. Because even though the haircut had been done to humiliate me, it had become a symbol of something else, that they had tried to break me and failed. Where are they now? Denise still lives in the same house. She occasionally sends messages through extended relatives, usually something vague and dramatic like, "I hope one day she'll come to her senses." From what I hear, she's still trying to control everything around her, still telling her version of the story, though fewer people seem willing to listen these days. Corinne moved out of town for a while. The canceled wedding was a blow to her pride, and apparently, she couldn't face the whispers. She deleted most of her social media, though I have no interest in keeping tabs. She never apologized, never even acknowledged what she did. And that's fine, because here's the truth. I'm not interested in being part of a family where cruelty is normalized, where silence is expected, and where the person who finally speaks up is labeled the villain. I've built a new kind of family now, friends who listen, relatives who understand, people who choose kindness over control. And I've learned that sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's growing up. So no, I don't forgive them. Not because I'm bitter, but because some things need to stay broken to protect the parts of you they tried to destroy. And in breaking away, I finally became whole. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.